My neighbor vanished and I found clues in their apartment. I've lived in this building for 6 years, and in all that time, I never expected my life to take a turn towards something I'd only seen in movies or read about in strange online posts. But now, as I sit in my dimly lit apartment typing this, I can't shake the feeling that the quiet, mundane life I cherished is gone for good. This is the story of my neighbor, Elias, and his unexplained disappearance. Elias moved into apartment 3B about a year ago. He was polite, reserved, and a bit of an oddball. While most of the tenants in our building at least exchanged pleasantries in the elevator or mailroom, Elias was always elusive. He'd nod or mutter a brief hello, then retreat to his apartment like a shadow slipping into the cracks. At first I didn't think much of it. After all, everyone has their quirks. But over time, little things about Elias started to nag at me. He always seemed on edge, like he was carrying a weight no one else could see. Sometimes I'd hear strange noises coming from his apartment late at night. Scraping sounds, muffled thuds, and what I could have sworn were whispers, though I never saw anyone visiting him. One evening, a week ago, I noticed something unusual. Elias hadn't been around for days. Normally, I'd catch a glimpse of him heading out with his backpack or see the glow of his television through his curtains late at night. But now his windows were dark, and his mail had started piling up by his door. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was traveling or staying with someone else. But then, 3 nights ago, something changed. I was coming home from a late shift at work when I noticed his door ajar. Just slightly, barely enough to notice, but definitely not fully closed. A faint, sour smell wafted out into the hallway. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make me stop in my tracks. I hesitated. Every rational part of me screamed to mind my own business and walk away. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, pulled me toward that door. I knocked softly. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Elias? You there?" Still nothing. I should have walked away. But instead I pushed the door open. Elias's apartment was a mess. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a dim gray light. Papers were strewn across the floor, along with books, empty food containers, and what looked like hastily packed clothing. The air was heavy, stale, and carried that faint sourness I'd noticed earlier. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. "Elias?" I called again, my voice trembling. The silence that followed felt unnatural, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. The living room was unremarkable aside from the mess, but as I moved deeper into the space, I began to notice odd details. A map of the city was pinned to the wall above his desk, marked with red push pins and scribbled notes. Strings connected some of the pins, forming a web of locations I couldn't decipher. On the desk was a notebook, open to a page filled with hurried handwriting. The words made no sense, just fragments of thoughts and phrases like, "They're watching," "It's not safe," and "Find the pattern." Beside the notebook was a small black box with a keyhole. It was locked, and I couldn't find a key anywhere nearby. I decided to check the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted as if Elias had left in a hurry. On the nightstand sat a single lamp, casting a dim yellow glow across the room, and a photograph in a cracked frame. It was a picture of Elias with a woman I didn't recognize, standing in front of what looked like a cabin in the woods. Both of them were smiling, but there was something off about the photo, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then I saw the closet. The door was slightly open, revealing darkness within. My chest tightened as I approached, my every instinct screaming to turn back, but I couldn't. I reached out and pulled the door open. Inside was a tangle of clothes and boxes, nothing unusual at first glance. But as I rummaged through, I found a small safe tucked in the corner. Unlike the black box on the desk, this safe was open. Inside was a stack of photographs, all of them black and white. They depicted strange, abstract shapes, spirals, lattices, and patterns that seemed to shift the longer I stared at them. Beneath the photographs was a handwritten note scrawled on a torn piece of paper. "Do not trust them. If you're reading this, it's already too late." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My hands shook as I put the note back and closed the closet. I didn't stay in Elias's apartment much longer after that. I snapped a few photos of the map and the notebook with my phone, then hurried back to my place, locking the door behind me. That night I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I'd seen. Who was Elias really? What had he been so afraid of? And most importantly, where had he gone? The next morning I decided to dig deeper. I started by looking up the locations on Elias's map. Most of them were ordinary places, parks, cafes, intersections. But one stood out, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Something told me that if I wanted answers, that warehouse was where I'd find them. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched as I prepared to leave for the warehouse. Every noise in my apartment made me jump. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the fridge, even the faint rustle of leaves outside the window. It all felt heightened, like the world around me had taken on a sharper edge. The warehouse Elias had marked on his map wasn't far, about a 30-minute drive from my apartment. I left around dusk, hoping the fading light would make me less noticeable. The roads grew emptier the closer I got to the location, the streetlights fewer and farther between, until I was driving in near darkness. When I arrived, the warehouse loomed ahead like a relic from a forgotten era. Its metal exterior was rusted and covered in graffiti, the windows broken or boarded up. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but a section near the gate had been cut away, leaving an opening just wide enough to slip through. My stomach churned as I parked my car a block away and approached the fence on foot. With each step, I questioned what I was doing. Why was I risking this for a neighbor I barely knew? But something deep inside pushed me forward. Curiosity, fear, or maybe the nagging sense that Elias's disappearance wasn't just his problem anymore. Inside the fence, the air felt colder, heavier. The warehouse loomed larger, its shadow stretching out like a dark stain across the cracked pavement. The main entrance was padlocked, but I found a side door that had been pried open just enough for me to squeeze through. The interior was a cavern of shadows. Dust hung in the air, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic and faintly sweet. I clicked on the flashlight app on my phone, the beam cutting through the darkness but barely reaching the far walls. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you start hearing phantom noises. My footsteps echoed unnaturally as I made my way deeper into the building. Then I saw the symbols. They were painted on the walls in stark black, jagged and geometric, like the patterns in the photographs I'd found in Elias's closet. Some were small, no larger than a handprint, while others stretched from floor to ceiling. The longer I looked at them, the more they seemed to shift, the lines writhing like living things. I forced myself to move on, my heart pounding in my chest. In the center of the warehouse, I found a circle of objects arranged with unsettling precision. There were candles, long since burned out, around a small metal box identical to the one I'd seen in Elias's apartment. Beside the box was a bundle of papers held together with a rubber band. I picked up the papers first, careful not to disturb the arrangement. Most of the pages were filled with sketches of the same strange symbols, but a few contained what looked like journal entries. One passage caught my eye. "They're not people. They wear our faces, mimic our voices, but they're not us. They slip into our lives unnoticed until it's too late. The warehouse is the only safe place, at least for now. But they know I'm here. I can feel them watching." My breath hitched. My mind raced with questions. Who was they? And why had Elias been so sure he wasn't safe? I turned my attention to the metal box. Unlike the one in his apartment, this one was unlocked. I hesitated, the air around me suddenly feeling thick and charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside was a small key and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, revealing a crudely drawn map with an X marked in the middle of a forested area. Beside the X was a single word, home. A noise echoed through the warehouse, a faint shuffle like footsteps on concrete. My flashlight flickered. I froze, every muscle in my body screaming to run. But I couldn't move. Then the footsteps stopped. I whipped the flashlight around, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing. The silence returned, heavier than before. My instincts screamed that I wasn't alone anymore. Clutching the box and papers, I bolted for the exit, my footsteps a deafening drum beat in the stillness. I didn't look back, not until I was outside the fence and halfway to my car. Only then did I stop, gasping for breath, and glance over my shoulder. The warehouse stood silent, its dark windows like empty eyes staring back at me. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove to the forest marked on the map, unable to shake the feeling that whatever I'd stumbled into was far from over. The woods were dense and eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing in from all sides. I followed the map to the X, finding a small weathered cabin hidden among the trees. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the same sour smell I'd noticed in Elias's apartment. The walls were covered in more symbols, along with photographs of Elias, the woman from the framed picture, and others I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a table with a single object, the black box from Elias's apartment. I opened it with the key I'd found in the warehouse. Inside was a recording device, its red light blinking faintly. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. Elias's voice filled the room, shaky and filled with fear. They're everywhere. They look like us, talk like us, but they're not us. If you found this, you're in danger. Don't trust anyone. Don't. The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by static. Then I heard it, a sound from outside the cabin, a low, guttural noise followed by the crunch of leaves underfoot. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. I wasn't alone. The last thing I remember before the lights went out was the cabin door creaking open. To this day, I don't know how I made it out of those woods. I woke up in my car, parked miles away, with no memory of how I'd gotten there. The black box and papers were gone, but the fear remains, clawing at the edges of my sanity. Elias is still missing. The warehouse has been sealed off, and the cabin doesn't appear on any maps. I've tried to move on, but sometimes, late at night, I hear whispers outside my window, faint and fleeting, but unmistakable. I don't know what's real anymore. But if you ever meet someone who seems off, don't ignore it, because they're out there, and they're watching.